The sun had just begun to set, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. 6-year-old Jake sat on the front porch, his tiny hands gripping the edges of the wooden steps as he waited for his father. It was their tradition every evening. No matter how long his day had been, Daniel would return home, scoop Jake into his arms, and ask about his day. Friends, before I share today's episode, I want to tell you an interesting stat. 99% of the people who watch our content enjoy it, but they haven't subscribed to our channel yet. If you're one of those 99%, all you need to do is a small task. Just look below this video, you'll see a subscribe button. All you have to do is click that subscribe button. It's as simple as that. And if you want, you can also press the bell icon so that you're the first to know whenever we upload a new video. Now, let's dive into the video. Daniel wasn't just a father, he was Jake's hero. A hard-working, kind and loving man, Daniel always made sure his son felt safe. Whether it was reading bedtime stories, playing soccer in the backyard, or just sitting with Jake to watch the stars, he never missed a moment to remind his little boy how much he loved him. But tonight was different. The sun disappeared behind the horizon. The streetlights flickered on. The usual sound of Daniel's car pulling into the driveway never came. Jake's mother, Lena, stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, her face as unreadable as always. Unlike Daniel, Lena was cold, distant. She was never affectionate, never really present in Jake's life. She spent most of her time on her phone or going out with friends, leaving Daniel to be the one who cared for their son. Jake looked up at her, his innocent blue eyes filled with concern. "Mom, when is Daddy coming home?" Lena let out a sigh, almost as if she were annoyed by the question. Then, with a sharp, emotionless tone, she said something that sent a chill down Jake's spine. "He's not coming back." Jake blinked. "Not coming back? That didn't make sense." "What do you mean?" His voice wavered, his small hands tightening into fists. Lena turned away, her voice flat. "He left us. Just accept it." Jake's chest tightened. His father would never leave him. He knew that. Something was wrong. He ran inside, searching the house, checking the garage. His father's car was gone. His toothbrush was still in the bathroom. His work boots were by the door, just like always. But Daniel was nowhere to be found. That night, Jake curled up in bed, clutching the stuffed bear his father had given him. A terrible feeling crept into his heart. Something wasn't right. And no matter what his mother said, he was going to find out the truth. Have you ever felt like something wasn't right but no one believed you? Keep watching to find out what Jake discovered about his mother. Days turned into weeks, but Daniel never came home. At first, Jake refused to believe it. Every evening, he sat by the window, waiting for his dad's car to pull into the driveway. He imagined Daniel walking through the door with a big smile, ruffling his hair and saying, "I'm home, buddy." But it never happened. At school, Jake found it hard to focus. His teacher noticed his distant stares, his quietness. His best friend Lucas asked why he looked so sad, but Jake didn't know how to explain it. How could he, when even he didn't understand? Lena, on the other hand, moved on as if nothing had happened. Within a few weeks, a new man started coming to the house. His name was Steve. Jake didn't like him. Steve was different from Daniel. Where Daniel was warm, Steve was cold. Where Daniel laughed, Steve barely spoke. He didn't seem to like kids, and whenever Jake was in the room, Steve would either ignore him completely or give him strange looks, as if he were a problem that needed to go away. Then, one night at dinner, Lena dropped a bombshell. "Jake, from now on, you'll call Steve Dad." Jake's fork clattered onto his plate. He looked at his mother, horrified. His dad wasn't gone. He couldn't be. "No," Jake whispered. "I already have a dad." Lena's expression hardened. "Your father left. Steve is here now." End of discussion. Tears burned in Jake's eyes. He wanted to scream, to argue, to tell her she was lying, but something in her tone scared him, so he stayed silent. Jake started noticing things, weird things. Lena would go into her room and talk in hushed tones on the phone. Whenever Jake walked in, she'd quickly hang up or lower her voice. One night, he heard her say, "No one's asking questions. He's too young to understand." Another time, he heard Steve whisper angrily, "You sure he won't remember anything?" The words made Jake's stomach turn. What did they mean? Then the nightmares started. In his dreams, he saw his father calling out to him, trapped in the dark. He would wake up drenched in sweat, his tiny chest heaving, heart racing. One night, he dreamt that his father was reaching for him, but just before he could grab his hand, he vanished into thin air. Jake knew one thing for sure: his father didn't just leave. Something bad had happened to him, and his mother was hiding something. The days passed in a blur, but Jake never stopped thinking about his father. He couldn't understand why everyone else acted as if Daniel never existed. His mother refused to talk about him, and Steve had practically moved in, taking over the house like he had always belonged there. But Jake knew the truth. His father didn't just leave. Something happened. One chilly afternoon, Jake sat alone in the living room, his fingers tracing the seams of the couch. His mother and Steve had gone out, leaving him in the quiet house. That's when he saw this father's old work bag stuffed inside the hall closet. Jake's heart pounded. Why was it still here? If Dad had left, wouldn't he have taken it with him? He hesitated for a moment, then slowly pulled the bag down, careful not to make a noise. He unzipped it with shaky fingers and dug through the contents: some papers, a few receipts, and then his dad's phone. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Lena had told him she threw it away, but here it was. With trembling hands, he pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. One unheard voice message. Jake's stomach twisted. He glanced at the door, making sure he was still alone. Then, with a deep breath, he tapped the notification. A crackling sound filled the room, followed by his father's voice. "Jake? Hey, buddy." Jake froze. His father's voice sounded shaky, unlike the happy, confident way he usually spoke. "Listen, I just want you to know something. If anything happens to me, always remember I love you, son. More than anything in this world, you're my everything." There was a long pause, then a deep sigh. "No matter what anyone says, never forget that, okay? I have to go now, but I'll always be with you." The message ended. Jake sat there, staring at the screen, his little hands ice cold. His father had sent this the night he disappeared. This wasn't right. Daniel wouldn't have just left. He wouldn't have sent a message like this unless he knew something was about to happen to him. Jake's pulse roared in his ears. His father had been in trouble, and now he was gone. Jake clenched the phone in his hands, his breathing uneven, his eyes burning with tears. His mother lied to him. His father didn't leave. Something terrible happened to him, and Lena knew the truth. Jake sat on his bed, gripping his father's phone tightly. His heart pounded with fear, but deep inside a fire had been lit. He had to tell someone who would listen, someone who loved his father as much as he did. His grandmother, Daniel's mum, Margaret, had always been kind to him. She was warm, soft-spoken, and always made him cookies when he visited. If anyone would believe him, it was her. The next morning, while Lena was busy in the kitchen, Jake sneaked into her bedroom and grabbed the house phone. His little fingers quickly punched in Margaret's number. The phone rang once, twice, then, "Hello?" Jake's breath hitched. "Grandma, it's me," he whispered. "Jake? Sweetheart, is everything okay?" Margaret's voice was full of concern. "No, Grandma, I found Dad's phone. There was a message from him the night he disappeared. He said if anything happened to him to remember he loves me. Grandma, something's wrong. Mum lied. Dad didn't leave us." The other end of the line was silent for a long moment. "Jake, are you sure?" "Yes," Jake pleaded. "Please, Grandma, you have to help me." Before Margaret could respond, a sharp click echoed in Jake's ear. The phone line went dead. Jake's stomach dropped. Slowly, he turned around. Lena was standing in the doorway. Her face was blank, but her eyes burned with silent rage. In her hand, she held the unplugged phone cord. "What did I tell you about bringing up your father?" Her voice was calm, too calm, which made it even more terrifying. Jake swallowed hard, his body trembling. "I just wanted to." Lena stepped forward, towering over him. "Jake, your father is gone. He's not coming back. And if you keep lying and making things up, people are going to think something is wrong with you." Tears welled in Jake's eyes. "I'm not lying." Lena grabbed his wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to send a message. Enough. She yanked the phone out of his hand, then reached into his pocket and pulled out Daniel's phone. Jake gasped. "No, give it back." Lena's lips curled into a cold smile as she snapped the phone in half and threw it in the trash. Jake watched in horror, tears streaming down his face. His last piece of his father, gone. "You need to forget about your father," Lena said, turning away. "Or I'll make sure you do." Jake sat frozen, his tiny fists clenched. He had never felt so alone. Lena was too powerful. She had control over everything, his home, his words, his truth. But Jake wasn't giving up. Deep in his heart, he knew his father's disappearance wasn't an accident. And no matter what his mother did, no matter how much she tried to silence him, he would find the truth. The house was silent. Jake lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The night was cold, and the wind howled against his window. But that wasn't what kept him up. It was the sinking feeling in his stomach. His father's voice message kept replaying in his mind. "If anything happens to me, always remember I love you, son." His mother's lies. The way Steve had taken over his house, the way Lena had destroyed Daniel's phone right in front of him. She was hiding something. And Jake was going to find out what. A sudden noise snapped Jake out of his thoughts. Voices. He sat up, straining his ears. It was coming from downstairs. Slowly, Jake climbed out of bed and tiptoed to his bedroom door. The hallway was dark, but the faint glow of the living room light spilled through the cracks of the staircase. Then he heard it. "We need to stop talking about this, Steve." Jake froze. It was Lena. Her voice was sharp, urgent. "No one will ever find him. It's over. We got what we wanted." Jake's breath hitched. Find who? He pressed his small body against the railing, inching forward carefully. His heart pounded so hard he thought they might hear it. "I just want to be sure," Steve muttered. His voice was low, almost nervous. "Are you sure the body will never be discovered?" Jake's entire body went cold. "I took care of everything," Lena snapped. "We burned his clothes, got rid of his wallet, and no one saw a thing. There's no body, Steve. They'll never find out what happened." Jake's hand shot to his mouth, trying to hold back a gasp. They were talking about his dad. His mother and Steve had done something to Daniel. A chill ran down his spine. He wanted to run, to scream, to cry, but he couldn't. His legs felt like they were glued to the floor. If they found him eavesdropping, what would they do to him? "We just have to keep up appearances," Lena continued. "The more time passes, the less people will care. That old woman, his mother, tried to ask questions, but I shut that down. Jake's just a kid. He doesn't understand anything." Jake's fingers curled into fists. She was wrong. "I still think we should have just left town," Steve muttered. "And do what? Start over broke?" "No," Lena hissed. "I didn't go through all this for nothing. The house, the money's ours now. And Jake, well, he'll fall in line eventually." Tears welled in Jake's eyes. His mother had betrayed them all. She wasn't sad that his father was gone. She was the reason he was gone, and she didn't care. Jake backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. He had heard enough. More than enough. His mother and Steve had hurt his dad, and if he wasn't careful, he might be next. But Jake wasn't going to let them win. He wiped his tears away, his small body trembling, but his mind made up. He had to get out of there. He had to tell someone. He had to get justice for his father. Jake barely slept that night. His heart pounded with fear, but his mind was set. He knew the truth, his mother and Steve had done something to his father. And if he didn't act fast, he could be next. He had to leave. He had to find someone who would believe him. Early the next morning, Lena was in the kitchen making coffee, her back turned. Steve was still asleep. Jake knew this was his only chance. He grabbed his backpack, stuffing in whatever he could, his favorite toy car, a sweater, and his father's old baseball cap. His heart raced as he crept toward the front door. With one last deep breath, he turned the doorknob and ran. The cold morning air hit his face as he sprinted down the street, his little legs moving as fast as they could. He didn't stop, didn't look back. He knew exactly where he needed to go. Grandma's house. When Margaret opened the door, she gasped. "Jake, honey, what's wrong?" she asked, pulling him inside. Jake burst into tears. He told her everything, the voice message, the phone call Lena had stopped, the secret conversation he overheard the night before. Margaret's face went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth. But she didn't waste a second. She grabbed her phone and called a lawyer. "I need to file for emergency custody of my grandson immediately." By the time Lena realized Jake was gone, the police were already at Margaret's house. Lena arrived in a fury, pounding on the door. "Give me my son," she screamed. Margaret stood firm. You're not taking him anywhere, Lena. I know what you did. Lena's eyes darkened. You have no proof. Not yet, Margaret said, gripping Jake's hand protectively. The legal fight had begun. Jake wasn't going back, not without a fight. The courtroom was packed. The air was heavy with tension, and Jake sat beside his grandmother, his small hands clenched into fists. He had never been in a place like this before, the tall wooden walls, the judge's bench high above, and so many strangers staring at him. But Jake didn't care about any of that. Today he was here to tell the truth. Across the room, Lena sat stiffly in her chair, dressed in a neat, pressed outfit that made her look like the perfect mother. Next to her, Steve avoided eye contact, his leg bouncing nervously. Lena's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, he said smoothly, my client Lena is a devoted mother. She has raised Jake since birth and has always provided for him. The accusations against her are nothing more than misunderstandings from a confused child being influenced by his grandmother. Jake's fists tightened. They were lying. Jake's father abandoned them, the lawyer continued. Lena had no choice but to move on. And now, her mother-in-law is trying to take her son away based on wild, unproven claims. Jake could see his mother nodding along, her face too calm. He felt sick. Then it was his turn. Margaret's lawyer stood and looked at him. Jake, can you tell the court what you told your grandmother? Jake swallowed hard, then climbed onto the witness seat. His legs barely reached the floor. He turned toward the judge, a kind-looking woman who gave him a small nod. Taking a deep breath, Jake sat up straight and spoke as loudly as he could. My mum lied. She hurt my dad. I heard her say it. The courtroom fell silent. Lena's face drained of color. What do you mean, Jake? The judge asked gently. I heard her talking to Steve. Jake explained, his voice shaking but steady. She said no one would ever find my dad, that it was over, and Steve asked if the body would ever be discovered. Gasps rippled through the room. Even Lena's lawyer looked shocked. That's a lie, Lena suddenly snapped, standing up. He's just a child. He doesn't know what he's saying. The judge raised her hand, silencing her. Let the boy speak. Jake turned back to the judge. She also broke my dad's phone. It had a message from him. The night he disappeared, he said if anything happened to him, to remember he loved me. The judge's face hardened. Margaret's lawyer placed a folder on the desk. Your Honor, we have more evidence. Lena stiffened. The truth was finally catching up to her. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Jake, you said there was a message from your father? Margaret's lawyer stepped up. Your Honor, while Lena destroyed Daniel's phone, we were able to recover the voicemail from the phone company. He pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the courtroom. Jake, hey buddy. If anything happens to me, always remember I love you, son. More than anything in this world, you're my everything. A long pause, then a deep sigh. No matter what anyone says, never forget that, okay? I have to go now, but I'll always be with you. The room was dead silent. Lena's face turned ghostly pale. Steve shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands sweating. Then, an investigator stood up. Your Honor, we have further evidence. We found Daniel's abandoned car near a wooded area outside the city. Upon closer inspection, we discovered traces of blood inside the trunk. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Lena gripped the table, her breathing uneven. Then Steve cracked. It wasn't my idea, he blurted out, standing up suddenly. His voice shook with fear. She made me do it. She planned the whole thing, Daniel's life insurance money. She told me they'd never find the body. Jake's heart stopped. You idiot, Lena screamed, slamming her hands on the table. Shut up! But it was too late. The judge's face was cold and stern. Bailiff, take them into custody. Lena thrashed against the officers as they pulled her from the courtroom. You can't do this. He's my son, she shrieked. Jake didn't flinch. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't afraid of her anymore. As Lena was led away in handcuffs, she turned back, her face twisted in anger. Jake, you ungrateful little... The door slammed shut behind her. Silence. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His nightmare was finally over. The judge turned to him with a gentle smile. Jake, you're a very brave boy. From this day forward, you will live with your grandmother. Jake felt his chest tighten with relief. Margaret pulled him into a tight hug, whispering, You're safe now, my love. A few days later, Jake and Margaret stood in front of Daniel's gravestone. The sun was shining, the breeze gentle. The world didn't feel so scary anymore. Jake knelt down, tracing the letters of his father's name. "I miss you, Dad," he whispered, "but I promise, I won't forget you, ever." Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. "He'd be so proud of you, Jake." Jake smiled. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Have you ever been brave enough to stand up for the truth? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories.